Captain Aaron Cole stood in the dim cold cell of the alien warship, the walls humming with the distant thrum of damaged engines, his breath clouding in the chill as he looked at the prisoner before him, a feline-like alien woman with golden eyes that glowed faintly in the shadows, her wrists bound by shimmering energy cuffs. Her gaze was sharp enough to pierce steel, and her tail lashed behind her slowly, as if calculating the exact moment she would strike. The distant rumble of explosions made the floor tremble under his boots, and dust drifted from the ceiling. Intercom crackled with orders from command to secure the prisoner and prepare her for transfer to the High Council. Aaron stepped closer, and the woman's lips curled in a hiss, her voice low and dangerous as she spat the words, "I'm not your pet." Before she tried to lunge at him, the cuffs sparking as they pulled her back, he caught her by the arm to steady her before she could fall, feeling her tremble beneath the thin fabric of her torn uniform, the scent of ozone and blood lingering in the air between them. Before he could speak, the deck shuddered violently, and the wail of the boarding sirens cut through the air. Flashing red lights bathed the corridor beyond the cell door as the words, "Enemy boarding detected," echoed through the ship. Aaron's gut tightened as he realized the attackers were not human. Their ships had locked onto the warship like predators on prey. He looked at the alien woman again and saw something shift in her eyes. For a moment, the fierce pride faltered and something else flickered their fear. Without wasting another second, he unlocked her cuffs and pulled her to her feet. She tried to resist, but another explosion ripped through the hallway, sending a blast of heat and debris into the cell. Aaron shielded her instinctively, glass and metal shards rattling off his back. The corridor outside was chaos, smoke curling and thick. Black streams, shadows of heavily armed figures cutting through the haze as they advanced. He pulled her into the hall, his hand firm on her wrist, her claws pricking his skin as she fought him at every step. But when the first enemy soldier appeared through the smoke and fired directly at her head, she froze, her eyes wide. Aaron slammed her against the wall just as the bolt sizzled past where she had been standing. The soldier advanced with mechanical precision, but Aaron's sidearm was already raised. The crack of plasma fire echoing in the narrow corridor, the soldier dropped. Smoke rising from the hole in his armor, they ran, boots pounding on metal as the boarding klaxon wailed around them. The alien woman's breathing quickened, and for the first time her grip on his arm tightened, not in defiance, but in desperate need for balance. Turning a corner, Aaron spotted two more attackers blocking the route to the hangar, their weapons raised. The alien woman yanked him back into a side passage, her movements sharp and calculated despite her limp. A blast tore through the wall. Inches from Aaron's head, heat searing his cheek, he realized she was guiding him through a maintenance route when she should not have known. But before he could ask how, the distant sound of more boots thundered behind them. They ducked into a dark service shaft, the narrow space forcing them close, her tail brushing his leg, her golden eyes catching the emergency glow in that moment as muffled voices echoed. Above, she leaned close and whispered with a rawness he had not heard before, "Don't let them take me." And something in her tone made his heart pound harder than any battle could. He nodded without a word, knowing whatever this was, it was only the beginning of a fight that neither of them might survive. But for now, in the narrow shadows of the shaft, he understood one thing: she was no longer just a prisoner. She was a target worth dying for, and he had just chosen her side without even knowing why. The air inside the maintenance shaft was thick with the metallic scent of heated circuits and the low hum of power conduits running along the walls. Aaron moved first, crawling through the narrow space with the alien woman close behind, her golden eyes reflecting the dim emergency light. strips. Every vibration in the hull told him the battle outside was worsening. The muffled booms of distant impacts sending shivers through the steel. He knew the enemy boarding party would not stop until they had her, and he still did not know why she was so important. The shaft opened into a small junction where 3 other tunnels branched off. Aaron hesitated, trying to remember the ship's layout. But before he could choose, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the right passage with surprising strength. He almost resisted until he noticed her ears, twitching as if picking up sounds he could not hear. They moved quickly, the shaft twisting and turning, the alien woman's tail brushing against his boot as they slid around corners. Behind them came the faint metallic clang of pursuit, boots on metal, the sound growing sharper. Aaron's chest tightened as he pushed faster, trying to put as much distance between them and their hunters as possible. Suddenly, a blast from below shook the floor, and a burst of heat surged through the shaft. Aaron shielded her as sparks showered down from a ruptured cable. She hissed but didn't pull away, their eyes locking for a split second before she turned and urged him onward. The passage narrowed further until they had to crawl on hands and knees, his shoulders scraping the walls, every inch forward feeling slower than the danger closing in. Then she froze, lifting her head slightly, her expression sharpening. Aaron could hear it too now, the faint scraping sound ahead of them. Someone else was in the shaft waiting. The alien woman motioned for silence and began moving forward with deliberate slowness. Aaron followed, his sidearm gripped tight in one hand. They rounded a bend and saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. Not the emergency strips, but the reflection off metal armor. The enemy soldier was crouched with his rifle aimed directly at the narrow gap. Aaron reacted instantly, shoving the woman against the wall of the shaft and firing. The shot ricocheted dangerously close to her head. The soldier slumped, blocking the passage. Without hesitation, she crawled over the body, her movements swift and almost cat-like. Aaron followed, feeling the heat of the soldier's still smoking armor against his leg. The shaft ended abruptly at a vertical drop, a ladder disappearing into darkness below. She didn't wait for him to decide. She swung onto the ladder and began descending rapidly. Aaron followed, his boots slipping on the worn metal rungs. Halfway down, another explosion ripped through the ship, the shaft swaying and groaning. A massive impact sent both of them slamming against the wall, his grip nearly breaking. He caught her arm to steady her, just as a section of the ladder below collapsed into the void. They had no choice but to leap the last few meters, landing hard in a dimly lit storage bay. Aaron's knees jarred painfully, but he stayed on his feet, scanning the shadows for threats. The alien woman's breathing was fast but controlled, her gaze darting to a sealed hatch in the corner. She moved toward it with urgency, entering a code so quickly he barely saw her fingers move. The door slid open, revealing a narrow cargo tunnel. Aaron hesitated, wondering how she knew these codes. But the sound of heavy boots pounding above them erased the question for now. They slipped inside, the hatch sealing behind them. The tunnel was dark and silent except for their breathing. The air smelled faintly of fuel and cold metal. She turned to him, her expression unreadable, and said in a low voice, "If you want to live, don't ask questions until we're off this ship," before walking deeper into the tunnel without looking back, leaving Aaron to follow, wondering just how far into danger he had already stepped. The cargo tunnel stretched ahead like an endless vein running through the belly of the ship, its walls lined with old metal plating that hummed faintly from the vibrations of the engines above. Aaron kept close behind her, his steps muffled against the grated floor, the dim emergency lights flickering every few seconds. as if the ship itself was struggling to stay alive. Each flicker made the shadows dance and stretch in unnatural ways. He could hear the thud of his own heartbeat in his ears, and every nerve in his body screamed at him to keep moving. The alien woman's pace was swift yet deliberate, her golden eyes scanning every corner, her tail swaying in sharp movements as if sensing invisible currents in the air. Ahead of them, the tunnel split into two paths, one sloping upward toward what Aaron guessed was the hangar deck, the other sinking deeper into the ship's underbelly. Before he could speak, she motioned sharply to the downward path, her voice barely above a whisper as she said that the enemy would expect them to go up. The lower decks were dangerous, abandoned for years, but that was exactly why they could hide there. They moved into the sloping tunnel, the air growing colder and heavier. Faint hissing sounds echoed from somewhere unseen. Aaron tightened his grip on his sidearm, the metal under his boots creaking with each step. The lights became fewer and dimmer until they were walking through stretches of near darkness. He could hear faint metallic clicks ahead, like something small scurrying across the floor. Suddenly she froze, her hand shooting out to press against his chest. They stood completely still, both straining to hear. The clicking grew louder, more erratic, then stopped altogether. Aaron's breath fogged in the cold air. From the shadows ahead, a glint of movement appeared, low to the ground but fast. He caught only a glimpse of thin, segmented limbs before it vanished again. She whispered that scavenger drones haunted the lower decks, old war machines left behind when the ship's previous owners abandoned it. They would attack anything warm and moving, and worse, they were silent until they were too close to stop. She began to move again, but slower now, her steps light and deliberate. Aaron followed, every muscle tense. The tunnel widened into a circular chamber lined with crates and old supply pods. She moved to the far side, weaving between the crates. Aaron kept his eyes on the shadows, half expecting something to leap out. A faint rattling above made him glance upward, just in time to see one of the drones unfolding from where it had clung to the ceiling, its red optical sensors glowing faintly as it dropped toward them. Aaron fired without thinking, the shot ringing out like thunder in the confined space. The drone hit the floor in a spray of sparks, its legs twitching, but the sound was like a beacon. More clicks erupted from every corner, echoing through the chamber. She cursed under her breath and sprinted for a hatch half buried behind a collapsed stack of crates. Aaron fired another drone that scuttled into his path, the air filling with the stench of burning metal. They reached the hatch and she slammed her palm against a panel. It resisted for a second, before groaning open just wide enough for them to slip through. Aaron dove in after her and felt the hatch slam shut behind them, cutting off the sound of the pursuing drones. They were in an even narrower passage now, the walls close enough that his shoulders brushed both sides. The only light came from a faint blue glow ahead. She moved toward it without hesitation, her voice calm but urgent as she told him they were heading for an old escape pod bay. But before they could reach it, the faint glow began to flicker, and Aaron realized with a chill that the light was moving toward them. Not away, something or someone was already here, waiting. Aaron's breath caught as the faint blue light grew brighter, pulsing gently like the heartbeat of some hidden creature. The narrow passage forced him and the alien woman to move in, single file, her tail brushing his leg as she slowed, every muscle in her frame tense. The sound of distant clicking from the scavenger drones had faded, but its absence felt heavier, like the silence was listening to them. The light ahead wavered, then split into two small orbs that hovered at chest height. The shape of a figure began to emerge from the shadows, tall and cloaked in something that shimmered faintly like liquid metal. Aaron's fingers tightened around his sidearm, but the woman reached back and pressed his wrist down. Her whisper, almost inaudible as she told him not to fire. The figure stepped forward, the two lights revealing themselves as narrow, luminous eyes. The face beneath was hidden by a smooth mask that reflected the faint glow of the tunnel walls. The air seemed colder here, as if the presence before them drew the warmth out of the space. The woman spoke first in a language Aaron didn't recognize, her tone a strange mix of caution and respect. The figure replied in a deep mechanical voice that vibrated through the floor beneath them. Aaron couldn't understand the words, but the way the woman's shoulders stiffened told him the exchange wasn't friendly. Slowly the figure raised a hand and extended long, jointed fingers tipped with delicate claws. In its palm rested a small, metallic disc no larger than a coin. The woman hesitated, then took it, her golden eyes narrowing as she turned it over. Aaron caught a glimpse of strange etched markings on its surface. The figure's voice deepened, rumbling like distant thunder. And the woman suddenly grabbed Aaron's arm, pulling him forward. She muttered that they were being hunted not only by the scavenger drones, but by something far worse. And this masked stranger had just given her the key to finding out why. They pushed past the figure, which made no move to stop them. But as Aaron glanced back, he saw it watching him. Its glowing eyes locked on him in a way that felt uncomfortably personal. The narrow corridor opened into the old escape pod bay. Most of the pods were missing, the skeletal remains of launch mechanisms jutting from the walls like broken ribs. In the center of the bay was a cracked console still faintly powered. The woman inserted the metallic disc into a slot. The console hissed and flickered to life, its screen flooding the dark room with pale green light. A rotating image appeared, showing a schematic of the ship, red marks glowing across multiple decks. Aaron realized they represented movement, hundreds of scavenger drones swarming toward their location. But then another marker appeared, larger, pulsing slowly and steadily, moving through the lower decks in a deliberate path. The woman's voice dropped lower as she explained that the drones were only the teeth of a much larger predator, an automated war sentinel left behind when the ship's original crew had perished. It had been dormant for decades until someone had reactivated it. Aaron felt a chill crawl up his spine as the large marker drew closer, its path cutting directly toward the escape pod bay. The woman yanked the disc out and the console went dark. She moved quickly toward one of the remaining pods, her hands flying over the controls. But the launch mechanism sputtered and refused to engage. The faint hum of the ship's engines was replaced by a slow, rhythmic metallic thud from somewhere beyond the walls, each one louder than the last. Aaron realized the sound was footsteps, impossibly heavy and growing closer. The woman glanced at him, her jaw set, and whispered that if the sentinel reached this bay, there would be no escape for either of them. The metallic thuds grew heavier, as if each step was pressing against the bones of the ship itself. The air felt thicker now, and Aaron could hear the faint vibration running through the deck plates under his boots. The alien woman moved with a sudden urgency, her fingers flying over the pod's manual release levers. But nothing worked, the ancient systems groaning in protest as if they were resisting her. Aaron's gaze darted toward the far end of the bay where the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. Then out of the darkness a silhouette emerged, tall enough that its head brushed the overhead girders. Its entire frame was plated in black armor that reflected no light, and its limbs moved with a disturbing fluidity for something so massive. Two burning red eyes ignited in the helm-like face and locked onto them instantly. The woman grabbed Aaron by the shoulder and shoved him toward the other side of the bay, where a sealed maintenance hatch waited. Her voice was sharp but quiet. As she told him not to look back, Aaron's instincts screamed at him to run, but the thuds were faster now, each one echoing with mechanical precision. The hatch was jammed and rusted shut, but the woman drew a short curved blade from her belt and jammed it into the seam, using it like a lever. Metal screeched and flaked as she forced it open, just enough for them to slip through. Aaron crawled. Inside first, the narrow tunnel beyond barely wide enough for his shoulders. Behind him, the woman squeezed through and yanked the hatch closed, just as a deafening crash rang out. The wall where they had been standing shook violently, and a piece of the bulkhead dented inward from a single blow. They kept moving their breaths. Harsh in the stale air, the tunnel curved downward, leading into a service conduit lit only by the dim flicker of dying power lines. Aaron's mind raced with questions, but he kept them inside, afraid any sound would carry back to whatever was following them. Suddenly, the woman stopped, her head tilting slightly as if she heard something different from the mechanical pursuit. Aaron listened and realized he could hear faint tapping from ahead, a slow, deliberate pattern like fingers drumming on metal. They rounded a bend and saw another figure crouched in the conduit, its body smaller and slimmer than the sentinel, but covered in the same black plating. This one had no visible eyes, just a smooth reflective mask. The woman froze her blade half raised, and Aaron felt the air in the tunnel change as the figure tilted its head toward them. Without warning, it launched forward impossibly fast. Aaron barely had time to register the movement before the woman shoved him sideways into a narrow crawl space. She spun to face the attacker, their weapons clashing in a burst of sparks that lit the tight space. Aaron tried to crawl forward, but the conduit ended abruptly in a locked grate overlooking the lower engine deck. Below, he could see shapes moving. Between the massive coolant pipes, more drones swarming like insects. The clangs of the fight behind him grew louder and then stopped abruptly, replaced by silence, so complete it made Aaron's skin prickle. He turned slowly and saw the woman standing alone, her chest rising fast, her blade slick with some dark fluid. The smaller sentinel lay crumpled against the wall, but before relief could settle, a low mechanical growl echoed through the conduit. Aaron realized with horror that the sound came from behind the body of the fallen machine. Two more red lights appeared in the dark and began to move toward them. The woman met his gaze and without a word motioned for him to follow her into the crawl space above them. The metal creaked under their weight as they climbed. The distant thuds of the larger sentinel, now joined by the sharper steps of its smaller hunters. Every sound telling Aaron that their time was almost gone. The crawl space above was tighter than Aaron expected, forcing him to press his chest against the cold metal while pulling himself forward with aching arms. Every movement made the panels groan, and he prayed the sound wouldn't carry to the hunters below. The alien woman moved ahead of him with unnerving grace, her body twisting through the narrow turns like she had done this 100 times before. From behind came the scraping of claws on metal and the occasional dull thud of something heavy striking the conduit walls. Aaron's breath caught when a sudden jolt shook the entire shaft, sending a fine dust of rust into his eyes. He blinked furiously but didn't dare stop. The woman glanced back and gestured sharply for him to keep moving faster. The path ahead sloped upward, and Aaron felt the strain in his muscles growing with each pull until they reached a small hatch barely big enough for one person. She punched in a code on a worn keypad, and the hatch slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with old storage crates and tangled coils of cable. They slipped inside, and she immediately pulled the hatch shut, locking it from the inside. For a brief moment, Aaron thought they were safe until he heard the faint metallic tapping from the other side of the hatch. The sound was slow, deliberate, like the hunter was tracing the outline of the door. The woman moved quickly, rummaging through a crate until she pulled out a small spherical device which she handed to Aaron and told him to hold tight. She then rolled another similar device toward the hatch and pressed a button, causing a thin red light to blink on its surface. Aaron opened his mouth to ask what it was, but before he could speak, there was a sharp vibration under his feet, followed by a deep humph of compressed energy. The walls shook violently, and the blinking red light vanished into a sudden flare of white. The hatch dented inward, but somehow held. The tapping stopped and silence filled the room. Aaron's heart pounded in his ears, but he realized the silence was wrong. It wasn't the silence of safety, but the silence of something waiting. The woman seemed to feel it too, because she quickly grabbed his arm and pulled him toward another exit on the far wall. This one led to a vertical shaft with a ladder disappearing into the darkness above. They began to climb the metal rung slick with condensation, making every step dangerous. Halfway up, Aaron's boot slipped, and he slammed against the wall with a loud clang. Below them, the silence shattered as the hatch burst open, and a dark shape lunged into the shaft. The woman shoved Aaron upward, urging him to move faster, and he climbed until his arms burned. The growl from below grew closer, and Aaron risked a glance down, catching sight of two red eyes closing the distance. Just as his strength was about to fail, the woman reached above him and pulled a lever hidden in the wall. A heavy steel plate dropped between them and the hunter below, sealing it off. The impact rattled the ladder but held firm. They climbed the rest of the way and emerged into a long corridor with walls lined in cracked viewing panels showing the swirling colors of deep space beyond. Aaron staggered forward, gasping for breath, while the woman closed the hatch behind them. For a moment they both stood there, breathing hard, until Aaron asked where they were going. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't read and said they had to reach the bridge before the sentinels rerouted. Before he could ask how far that was, the corridor lights flickered and died, leaving them in near darkness. From the shadows at the far end came a low rumbling sound and the faint glimmer of another pair of red eyes. Aaron froze as the low rumbling grew louder, echoing through the narrow corridor like a predator announcing its hunt. The dim emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, jagged shadows along the cracked walls, and for a moment it felt as if the entire ship was holding its breath. The alien woman stepped in front of him, her body tense, her hand gripping a small curved blade that seemed to shimmer faintly even in the darkness. She motioned for Aaron to stay behind her and moved forward. With slow, deliberate steps, her eyes fixed on the two red points of light at the far end. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed closer, and Aaron realized whatever was ahead was moving on all fours, its limbs hitting the ground with a sickening rhythm. The air felt heavy, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Yet he followed her, staying close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her. A sudden spark erupted from a broken panel to their left, momentarily lighting up the corridor and revealing a hulking shape. Crouched low, its body covered in shifting black armor that seemed almost alive, the creature's eyes locked on Aaron. And the woman stepped sideways, blocking its view, her blade rising into a ready stance. Without warning, the creature lunged forward with impossible speed, and the woman met it head on, her blade clashing against a set of jagged claws, sending a burst of sparks into the stale air. Aaron stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a fallen cable as the two fought in a blur of motion, the sound of metal on metal ringing in his ears. He saw the creature's claws slash toward her chest, but she twisted away, slashing her blade along its arm, causing it to recoil with an ear-splitting screech. It fell back into the shadows only to dart out again from the side, forcing Aaron to dive out of its path, his shoulders slamming painfully into the wall. The woman spun and drove her blade deep into the creature's side, and for a heartbeat everything went still before it erupted in a violent thrash, knocking her off her feet. Aaron's instincts took over, and he grabbed a length of heavy cable from the floor, swinging it hard and catching the creature across the head, the impact making it stagger. She was back on her feet in an instant, using the distraction to slash once more, this time striking deep into its neck. The creature let out a guttural howl before collapsing to the floor, its body convulsing as the black armor began to melt away into a dark sludge that hissed and steamed on contact with the metal surface. Aaron's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, but the woman grabbed his arm, pulling him forward, saying they had no time to waste because more would come. They ran down the corridor, the walls vibrating, as somewhere deep within the ship alarms began to wail, a slow rising tone that made Aaron's skin crawl. They reached a heavy reinforced door at the end, and she slammed her hand onto the control panel, but nothing happened, the lights around it flickering weakly. Cursing under her breath, she pulled open a small maintenance panel beside the door and began rewiring the controls with quick, practiced movements. Aaron glanced back down the corridor and froze when he saw more red eyes appearing in the darkness, one pair, then two, then four, moving toward them with that same deliberate predator's gait. He shouted for her to hurry, and she ripped the last wire free, slamming it into place. The door groaned and then slid open, just enough for them to slip through before it sealed shut behind them with a heavy thud. Inside was a wide chamber bathed in the cold blue glow of navigation displays, showing a three-dimensional map of the ship surrounded by blinking warning markers. Aaron barely had time to take it in before she told him they had reached the bridge, but it was already compromised, and if they didn't act now, the entire vessel would be under Sentinel control within minutes. If you love thrilling HFY Sci-Fi stories like this, turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next twist in our sci-fi universe. Make sure to hit that subscribe button